Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a pleasant surprise. I wasn't planning on doing this 15 minutes ago and I got inside. Well, what happened is my partner has just gone to the doctors with my partner's daughter. My partner's daughter lives with us with her baby, just had a baby, so she's living with us rather than at an apartment in Portsmouth, so we can help support. And baby's not very well today, high temperature, coming out in a rash. So I phoned the doctors and phoned 111, and my partner's gone with her. So that should all be fine. I think the baby's going to be fine. It's not a problem. But I'm like, oh, my partner's gone. What do I do? Let's jump online. I've got a massive load of geopolitical stuff to do. Oscar's in there watching The Equalizer 3. So he's got a particular mind where he watched The Equalizer last night with me and my missus, and then he's like, right, I have to watch Equalizer 2. So straight away afterward, like, it becomes like a massive argument. But the way his brain works is like he has to just watch Equalizer 2, and then he now is on to today Equalizer 3. So he'll exhaust that. So that's him. Finn's in his normal gaming seat position, shooting people on Siege, and I'm in my normal position of talking to the world about geopolitics. That's how my world works. I was just at the end of the garden drinking beer. So, apologies if A, I don't make much sense due to a couple of beers in me, and B, the heat affects my MS really quite majorly. And I've really struggled to walk at the moment. I'm terrible. My movement's terrible. I'm all right upper body generally. Although I can't feel my fingers at all, that kind of stuff. So anyway, heat affects the way I talk and the way my brain works, or doesn't, and a couple of beers. So like if I am not very cogent, I do apologise. But I was down the end of the garden. I did a couple of shorts. One I did for my philosophical channel, Atypical Philosopher. That's where the ATP comes from, if you don't know. So I have another channel, Atypical Philosopher, where I talk about whether or not God exists. And I was just postulating, thinking at the bottom of the garden after finishing a beer and being attacked by a couple of wasps. We don't have wasps around here. I haven't had them for ages. And then the last couple of days, they seem to be about. So it must be a nest somewhere nearby. And I was just being attacked, and I've got a bit of a phobia of wasps, and I have very few things that I'm particularly phobic about. Well, only that, and trypophobia? Like holes in particular arrangements. It's a weird thing. But anyway, wasps were attacking me, and I was like saying to my missus, look, if I was God, I would just get rid of wasps and mosquitoes just like that before thinking about anything else. Like earthquakes and cancer, that's way down the list. It's wasps and mosquitoes. Anyway, so I just did a little short thinking about that. I came back inside and thought, right, time to speak to you guys about geopolitics, which I haven't done yet. I've just been speaking about cabbages and kings and not making much sense. So anyway, it is exceptionally hot. It's been really hot today. We're in a third heat wave of the summer in the UK because, climate change and all that. And if you look at the stats for days that have been over 30 degrees in the UK since like 1970, like you'd have loads of days without loads of summers without 30-degree days in them, and now we're having like so many summers with 30-degree days. I mean, the stats are completely different for how our summers are looking these days. But there you go. Okay, so we are going to talk about geopolitics, not the weather, not whether or not God exists, and certainly not what my opinions are of wasps. Okay, strap yourselves in, guys. Let's go for it. And I'm operating a system because I'm going to play sound on some of these, so I have to change my tab each time. Like the recorder doesn't follow my tab change. I have to manually change each tab. So just shout at me in the comments, and I probably won't see it. But if I forget to change the tab, right? So we're going to start with Slovakia will back new EU sanctions against Russia if it secures an alternative to Russian gas, according to Politico. Prime Minister Robert Fico said he's ready to support the 18th sanctions package, but only if a prior deal on energy supplies is reached. We aim to settle the issue by July the 15th. He added, that is very significant. It is going to be super important to make sure, if this gets finalized and gets through, even if there are some compromises, this is going to be so important for keeping the Russian feet against the coals, against the fire, because with the US not doing an awful lot in terms of sanctions enforcement, it's going to be up to the EU, UK and Canada, Japan, etc., to keep the pressure on the Russians. We must win something in this fight, although it will not be 100-0 results. We want political commitments, guarantees from partners and the European Commission that this problem will not remain solely on the shoulders of Slovakia, said Fitzo. And again, I have already failed in my initial tab. I can't even speak now. Tab swapping situation. Whatever. Estonia, on the same subject of the 18th sanctions package. Estonia has threatened to block the 18th sanctions package, but from the other end, really, if the price ceiling for Russian oil doesn't fall from $60 to $45 per barrel, if that is removed from the package, Estonia said that they are going to veto the sanctions package. So fascinating. You've got Slovakia and Hungary at one end going, and then putting obstacles in place. And you've got Estonia at the other end saying, look, if it's not hard enough, we're not letting this go through. That's reported by Delphi. The Mediterranean countries want to exclude this point. So there's a lot of pressure on the oil price cap from both ends, as you can see there. Okay, we have the European Commission proposing on Friday, so yesterday, a floating price cap on Russian oil of 15% below the average market price. So that's interesting. So the cap can move. It can go above 60 as long as the world price is higher. I'm not such a fan of that because they still make enough money on that. It's not about making less than the rest of the world. It's about not allowing them to make it at a point where they are making profit, really, or significant profit on that. So, for example, if the break-even point is, say, $50, then you want to keep it around $50 or maybe 60 at the most, and they're only making a tiny bit of profit. But if the global price goes up to 100 and they're able to sell it at 85, then that's not as much as other people around the world be making. But that's not the point. It's not about comparative profits. It's about how much profit they make at all, if they make any at all, irrespective of what everyone else earns. So I'm not really happy about that. The cap bans trade in Russian crude oil transported by tankers if the price paid was above $60 per barrel and prohibits shipping, insurance, and reinsurance companies from handling cargoes of Russian crude around the globe unless it is sold for less than the price cap. The Commission initially proposed in June to lower the cap from $60 to $45 as part of the 18th package of sanctions on Russia. So I presume I've understood that correctly. And I guess we'll have to see what comes out in the wash. Okay. Finnish President Stub. Now, I just watched a video of him finishing a triathlon, and he came second in the triathlon. He secretly entered the triathlon under the initials AS, right? And then he finishes it. And this is a week after he did some kind of army run with backpacks and whatnot. He's some kind of machine, this man, and he's just running a country, not a problem. So anyway, well done, Stub, doing a good job there of being physical. Putin is a strategic fool and a military failure. He wanted to destroy Ukraine, but it will become a member of the EU and eventually NATO. He's telling it how it should be told. Right, moving on to talk of the recovery conference in Italy just the other day. Zelensky spoke at the conference on Ukraine reconstruction. Now the whole world sees that Putin does not seek peace. We must stop Russian drones and missiles. This means more air defense and more interceptor drones. Ukraine needs investments and you need technology. In fact, there's been some announcements today. I've kind of got it really more for the military aid video. But basically, they're looking at ramping up massively and contracting out for the rest of the capacity, massively ramping up production of drones, particularly interceptor drones. We need a systematic approach to the issue of Ukraine's reconstruction. We need a Marshall Plan approach, and we must develop it together. Russian frozen assets must be used for the benefit of Ukraine to help protect the lives of the Ukrainians. We are already preparing for the next winter. We need to continue working together so that Ukraine can go through the fourth in the war conditions winter. Together, we will overcome energy challenges. Putin has only two real allies, terror and winter. We must respond to both. interesting how he sees winter as much more of a challenge than summer, and yet summer is a time when there is more military pressure on the Ukrainians, one would have thought. Although, having said that, throughout the winter, I mean, the Russians had their biggest losses over this last winter period, I think, during the whole of the war. So maybe that the idea that you mainly fight during the summer months when the ground is harder, and when there isn't too much mud around, maybe that's just not actually the case. I don't know. Right, Ukraine needs a new Marshall Plan, says Trump's envoy Keith Kellogg as well. Ahead of the recovery conference, international partners must help Ukraine rebuild by introducing their own Marshall Plan, US Special Envoy Keith Kellogg has said. So they met at the conference. Right, Donald Tusk received applause for his speech dedicated to Ukraine. Quote, Ukraine is not only a country in need, it's also a country that inspires and teaches us. While our consciences cannot rest while Putin attacks civilians night after night. Ending this war must be our common cause. Now is the time to begin a new chapter, the chapter of Ukraine's recovery and peace. The Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, spoke about this today in Rome at the Ukraine Recovery Conference. So he got a rapturous applause there for his Ukraine statements. Now, according to Reuters, Ukraine will become the first European nation to offer Starlink mobile services when leading operator Kyivstar launches messaging by year end and mobile satellite broadband in mid 2026. Now, I don't really know like the ins and outs technologically of this. Field tests have begun under an end of 2024 deal with SpaceX's commercial broadband constellation to allow tech entrepreneur Elon Musk's company to launch direct to sell services in a war-torn country. Now, I don't know the ins and outs technically of this. However, getting Musk on side economically is a savvy thing to do. And I think that Musk has not pulled out support for Ukraine because it would economically hurt him so much with the amount of subscriptions for Starlink that he has. So, yeah, I think that's probably good news there, to be perfectly honest. Now, Poland's president-elect urges Ukraine to allow full exhumations of the Volyn massacre victims despite resumed work. So Karol Nawrocki, so he's still the president-elect, that's interesting, said the victims do not cry out for revenge, but for a cross, a grave, and memory, and urged Ukraine to authorize further work across multiple sites. What's interesting here, and this came up again recently, but it's actually from a quote that was quite a long time ago. I think this is 5 months ago, February the 6th here. Polish President Andrzej Duda spoke about his conversation with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky about the Volyn tragedy. So the Volyn tragedy is where during World War II, I can't remember what it was, 42, 43, something like that, a load of Ukrainian nationalists massacred a bunch of Polish people. And sorry, my language is probably quite diminishing there, but this was a really serious thing, obviously. But what's fascinating is that at least Duda claims this. During a conversation, the latter allegedly said that, so Zelensky said he'd learned about the Volyn massacre only after becoming president. Duda said in an interview with Canal Zero. The idea was that he wasn't taught this, that it's not taught. Again, history is taught by the victors, or at least, what we learn in our curriculums at school are very biased to making our own countries look very good. Right. So, our teaching of, say, the British Empire in our classrooms around the UK will maybe look a little bit different to how a Caribbean school might teach it, or an Indian school might teach it, right? So that needs to be taken into account. But I think it's fascinating that here we have an incident that is apparently very high on the agenda for the Polish and not even taught by the Ukrainians, because obviously it's quite embarrassing for the Ukrainians. But yeah, anyway. Czech Intelligence confirms Ukrainian refugees now contribute more to the economy than they receive in government aid. This has been reported as well by, was it the Germans that brought out a report saying they'd contributed something like some phenomenal amount of money, 80, and I was going to say 80 billion, but I don't know if it's 80 million actually rather than 80 billion. But anyway, 80 billion is a lot of money. But anyway, the Germans did announce a similar thing recently. So the Czechs here saying that that the Ukrainian refugees are a net contributor to the country, and yet anti-Ukrainian parties lead in the 2025 election polls at 35%, proving economic success doesn't guarantee political survival. Right, the analyst here is reporting on Russia's adopted crypto scam designed to make up lost revenue. Backed by the largest defense sector bank in Russia and a Moldovan who scammed tens of thousands of people there and in Romania, so that's Elon Shaw. The cryptocurrency was created in Kyrgyzstan. I've talked about this before, and this is a way around sanctions and not being able to do financial transactions through banks, right? Using SWIFT system, using things that governments can regulate. So that allows you to sanction. Of course, cryptocurrency, the advantage of it is the lack of regulation on it, which is what libertarians love, but it's not too good for enacting sanctions on international ne'er-do-wells like Russia. So it uses tokens and charges fees and can be used as a payment exchange at the same time as attracting people trying to make a quick profit. The purpose for the Kremlin is to sell oil and gas and get paid from from and by places currently blocked by sanctions and money exchange controls. It's become increasingly important as sanctioned shadowed fleet vessels are finding it difficult to make port or even reach them without an escorting warship to deter arrest. A7A5 avoids identification of buyers and can be purchased outside of the SWIFT international settlement system. However, latest reports suggest that while over $9 billion has been exchanged, it's mostly smoke and mirrors to encourage others to use it by creating fake value as one or two people make a large number of irrelevant transactions. The fact is that Russia is struggling to get the whole thing to work. Many are suspicious of it, and even more suspect it will inevitably attract Western sanctions. It's the desperation behind the move that is striking. Oil revenues have fallen 50% in barely a month, and OPEC is looking to even more production increases as it searches to regain customers Russia has stolen, which will slash Russian income further. It will cause many US shale oil extraction sites to close as their costs are so high. Either way, for Russia, the trend is looking disastrous. The crypto scam won't save them. Their disingenuous actions stealing oil market share will while agreeing to cut production, and not doing so has upset the Arab oil states, and they're having their revenge. Russian finances, again, remain a mess. The options are running out. Every banking and fiscal sleight of hand has been either used or has failed. The only answer is end the war now, before it's too late. That way, Russia could just about scrape by, yet Putin seems to have decided to carry on regardless. So that's an interesting little analysis there from the analyst. Amazing that he does analysis. Okay, moving on to Prune, who does a lot, Prune 60 or Prune 606, depending on where you see them, or 602, sorry. So Prune here says, quoting from the Moscow Times, Russia restricts imports of dairy products from Azerbaijan amid sharp deterioration in relations. So they have moved from kind of shouting at each other and having issues to do with the Azerbaijani diaspora communities within Russia and picking on them and arresting people. And then the Azerbaijanis arresting FSB workers in the Sputnik offices that were still kind of operating in Azerbaijan, in Baku. And now that's moved to economic sanctions of one sort or another. Russia has responded sharply to Azerbaijan's accusations of food censorship. So in response to Baku's accusations of food censorship, the State Duma reminded about Sampin. I'm not sure what Sampin is. Federal Service for Veterinary and Phytosanitary Surveillance announced its introduction of a ban on the import of all types of dairy products from two of Azerbaijani manufacturers to Russia, companies Allbuy and Milk Products LLC. So this is just their revenge. But I don't want people in Azerbaijan to be having issues here, but what you want to see from a Ukrainian point of view is the nations that are otherwise in the Russian sphere of influence kicking off against Russia and having issues and going through events like this and not getting on and distancing themselves from the Russians and then running into the arms, hopefully not of China, but maybe the West. So that is happening. Now, talking about influence and influence operations, I spoke to Philip Obaji Jr., the Nigerian journalist, about Russian disinformation and influence campaigns in the Sahel region of Africa. Fascinating discussion. If you haven't watched it, please go and watch it. It's on the live tab. Now, here we've got Bolivia. So chaos erupts in Bolivia's parliament with over a lithium deal with a Russian company. In La Paz, lawmakers put on a full-blown show, dragging tables, snatching microphones, shouting and climbing onto podiums. The reason, a contract with a Rosatom subsidiary to mine lithium in Potosi. The opposition claims Bolivia's natural resources are being handed off like items on eBay without asking the people. Protest signs read, "Lithium is not for sale and don't touch your lithium." Lawmakers say a similar deal with China was already pushed through, and now it's Russia's turn at the table. So interesting that there are issues with the selling off of natural resources. Here we're looking at South America and selling them to Russia. That's happened across Africa, and the US has stepped out of Africa, really, to quote a book and a film. The French have been pushed out as well, and that's left a power vacuum that has seen the Russians step in, Chinese to some degree, and the same can be said for South America. Sorry, what are the United States, for example, doing about that? Is this a concern for them? I don't know. Right, moving on. So had that in the wrong order. Sorry, I just had that tab in the wrong order. So going back to Azerbaijan, a meeting between the president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, and the prime minister of Armenia, Pashinyan, is taking place in Abu Dhabi. It has taken place. If a peace deal is indeed signed, it will be a major step forward for the two countries, and it will further remove them from Russia's influence. I think there was a deal signed, so I think they are very much closer together, and that could really show Russia that the Kremlin isn't needed for either country, and just it's continuing to sever ties with Russia. Now, talking about that conversation with Philip Oboji Jr., how interesting is this? So if you remember the map of West Africa, you've got all those countries like Central African Republic, then going on up to sort of Niger, Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso, and then you've got a couple of others sort of around there, like Ghana. And Ghana is ready to finance our drone production, and we are ready to help our partners secure their borders, says Zelensky. What the frick? So what is Zelensky doing getting involved with Ghana? And of course, what you want to do is stop that rot in West Africa, whereby Russia is infecting those countries with their propaganda, with their influence operations, and turning them into kind of Russian proxies and using them in order to extract money and natural resources. Intel Schizo here says this is actually pretty big that Ukraine says that they're willing to assist Ghana in protecting their borders, because they're practically the only country left in the Sahel that hasn't been overrun by an AQ and IS. So you've got Russians, then you've got as well Islamic fundamentalists operating around there. So as someone says, Ukrainian-Ghana military cooperation may seem random, but one needs to remember that Ghana is just south of Burkina Faso, which is currently getting overrun by jihadists. Really significant, and it would have been fascinating to have talked about this. This happened just after I spoke with Philip Oboji, but I wonder if that could be on the cards for talking about next. Okay, so there's one to watch out for, certainly. Ukraine involved with Ghana there. Right, now we're going to go to Eastern Europe. We're going to go to Hungary. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has declared Ukraine has lost the war. Oh, good to have you on side, mate. And so has Europe, claiming no one has the courage to admit it. He insisted victory on the battlefield is impossible and called for a ceasefire and diplomacy. Okay, thank you, great Lord Toad, in your supreme Jabba the Hutt leadership. Right, so on the same sort of subject of Hungarian politics, MOL Nurt, the Hungarian oil company that's faced criticism for maintaining strong reliance on Russian energy, sees a pipeline from the Ukrainian port of Odessa as its best bet at diversification. So this is good news. What you want is for Hungary to have alternatives to Russian hydrocarbons. And if there can be oil that comes from Ukraine through Ukraine to join the existing pipeline that comes down from Russia to Hungary and Slovakia, then hey, that sounds like good news. So that could be really beneficial for Hungary and for Ukraine, actually. So excellent stuff. Okay, sticking on Hungary, Orban's daughter Rahel and husband have moved to New York ahead of the 2026 elections, signaling political caution. Meanwhile, some think tankers funded by Orban's regime plan exit strategies as polls drop. Now, I reported recently that the son of Viktor Orban, I think it was, had got his UAE residency because there is, it's thought, no extradition agreements between the UAE and Hungary, and so therefore it's really I think, well, it's revealing that he has gone to the UAE potentially, or is looking towards the UAE, and here the daughter and husband of Jabal are thinking about, running away to New York. Are we seeing an indication that Fidesz may well lose that next election? That they are looking at the tea leaves, they're reading the tea leaves, they're seeing the polls at the moment, and they are understanding that there's a very good chance that TGEO, the Peter Magyar opposition party, may well kick Fidesz out. And then Fidesz, of course, have got Viktor Orban's party, and Viktor Orban has a choice. Do you double down and rig the election, or do you allow democracy to take its course, but then have to suffer the consequences of not being in power, or the wrath of the EU as you do things in order to rig the election? So it's a bit of a dilemma for Fidesz there. Of course, you would hope they would just allow democracy to act. Right, just a couple on the US that have just come out today that just blow my mind. So Rosie ODonnell is someone that Trump absolutely hates. And by the way, she's answered this as well. I haven't got the answer here. Answer's fascinating. So Donald Trump has said this, and this is super, super worrying. So I've done a lot of videos on how much I think the American democracy is under the cosh and is vulnerable to being turned into autocracy. Donald Trump said on Truth Social, which is his way of communicating everything, because of the fact that Rosie ODonnell is not in the best interests of our great country, I'm giving serious consideration to taking away her citizenship. She is a threat to humanity and should remain in the wonderful country of Ireland if they want her. God bless America. He can't do this. You cannot revoke the citizenship of an American citizen just because you don't like them. Like, this is looking more and more like a dictatorship. She then replied, "You can't do that. It's not constitutional, blah, blah, blah." And then she put at the end of the very, very short tweet, "And I've got the Epstein files and I will release them." Literally said, God knows if she's got them. But if she has, I mean, it could be why he's saying this, right? But there's a can of worms to open, isn't it? But you can't do, he's already talked about sending American prisoners to gulags in El Salvador, right? That he's already said, yeah, we're sending these supposed Venezuelan gang members, these illegal immigrants, even though they weren't following due process. They invariably weren't generally criminals. They were just like whisking people off the street, sending them to gulags. And then people are like, you shouldn't have been able to do that. You didn't follow due process, and they weren't criminals. And anyway, he then said, well, I've got nothing against sending American criminals to these places. And then you're like, I'm going to just revoke people's citizenship, turn them into just finding out ways to lock people up. It's just looking more and more like a dictatorship. It's absolutely outrageous. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that one in there. And then last one I'm going to throw in there is this, for as far as Trump's concerned. Then we're going to go on to actually mainly British politics and a bit of France and whatnot. Trump, I met with the world leaders. Now, sometimes you can't quite trust how Max 25 transcribes what is said. Assuming what is written here is what Trump actually said, this is outrageous and very Trumpian. I met with the world leaders. I met with them all. I met with them all. I met with them. You know, the world leaders. I met with them. There was that one. There was the other one. There's that third one. The fourth one I met with all of them. Anyway, I met with all of them, and they all said this. This is Trump saying. They said, "This is incredible. Your country was dead a year ago, and now you are the most powerful nation today." And every leader says, "We are together with the most powerful nation in the world." It's just absolutely insane. It's just that's insanity talking. No, all the world leaders haven't said this. Tell you what, most world leaders think you're a plonker. He also said at one of these, let's speak underneath a helicopter engine, as he's inclined to do these days. It's just the most inopportune place to do any kind of audio recordings. He said that under Biden, 300,000 children went missing. We've already found 10,000 of them. We're going to find the rest. But what are you talking about? It's just absolute nonsense. Anyway, I just thought I'd leave you with a couple of crazy Trumpisms there before we go on to talk about Europe and the UK. But in the meantime, shall we have a look to see what you guys are saying and talking about in the live stream? Let's have a couple of questions. Stephen Bendell, thanks for your support, my good man. Let's get my stupid face back on the screen. The price cap should be below the production cost for Russia. They can't stop the flow because they can't start it again. That's a really good point. So even it's not about not allowing them to make money. It's about allowing them to keep the oil flowing so that it doesn't affect global stocks and prices adversely. So it doesn't really matter if they're making a loss or not. They'll still want to keep it flowing, even if they are keeping a loss because making a loss, because actually they have to do that in order to just have oil in the future. They will have to lose money. That's a win-win situation for the world. So good point there from Stephen Bendell. And thanks for your support, Stephen. You are very kind. And thank you on, I think, buy me a coffee as well. You supported me the other day, and I just thank you. You're just a tremendously nice human being. Johnny Nebregard, Norwegian legend. All these people from Scandinavia appear to be jolly good people. I know that's a massive generalization. Johnny, hello team, Slava Ukraini. Thank you. Michael Vuchar, Canadian, gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you, sir. You are very kind. And talking about Canadians, and I've been thinking about Mark recently. I don't give him enough props for just being a legend. For me, it's like Russia is in a constant state of winging it. They are improvising as they go, all in an attempt to look strong and to sell that illusion of strength. What do you think? Do they have a plan? I think this is a really interesting comment and question, Mark. So I think there is an element of winging it. I think their central bank, Elvira Nabiullina, has been doing everything she possibly can to keep the Russia's economy afloat, but they've kind of pulled all the levers they can pull. And really, they're now in a position where, and to be honest, most governments have far fewer levers than you think they do. Like when you vote a government in, you think, oh yeah, they're going to make all these changes. Actually, there are taxes that you can change, and there are different welfare like projects or departments you can fund or not fund, but that doesn't affect the economy really. Like your economy is essentially part of a global network of economies, and there's very little that you as an individual country can do to affect global economics, especially if you aren't, China, the US, and some of these massive economies. And when it comes to Russia trying to work out what to do about sanctions and the war, there's not an awful lot you can do. You can mess around with the ruble. You can mess around with sovereign wealth funds. You can mess around with interest rates. But other than that, there's not too much you can do. So I think there's going to be a lot of kind of winging it. I do wonder, Mark, how much Putin knows about the war in the finer details, and how much is being fed to him by the propagandists around him. Uh, and I think that's worth thinking about. Like, if he doesn't have a firm grasp of what's going on, then he's going to make poor decisions. And I do, like, because I keep saying that the Russian economy is much closer to collapse at the moment now than it has previously been by a country mile. And if that is true, like, how much does Putin realize that? I really do wonder. Sorry, just speaking to child. Although he says, but it's really hot. Yeah, it's like, can you close your door? You're a bit noisy for the old live stream. It is. It's like a sweatshop in there. So, like a sauna. He's not really making cheap trainers for Western countries. So yeah, I think there is a sense of winging it. I think they are desperate. So Lavrov going to North Korea, and this is not for the North Korea's been visited a number of times recently. Um, I think Russia are desperate for people. They are just about getting away with it in terms of manufacturing weapons and things like Shahids. And I think a lot of that comes down to the US not enforcing sanctions and finding loopholes. And those in the earlier days of the war, they'd find loopholes to sanctions, and then it'd be whack-a-mole with loopholes in terms of what the EU and the US was doing in concert. So they were working together cooperatively to make sure that Russia was in a difficult place economically. But now, since January the 20th, I don't think the Treasury gives a damn, and so they're not following up on closing loopholes from the US point of view, and they're not putting extra sanctions on. And hopefully something might get announced on Monday to that effect, but who knows? So it's really down to Europe and to an extent the UK and Canada and Japan and Australia, but that makes it less effective, and Russia can unfortunately get around those sanctions more easily. And they are able to produce things, but I do think there are so many indicators that they're in an awful lot of trouble economically. So yeah, I think Russia are adhering to the maxim I said the other day, which is life is like a game of cards. It's not the cards you've got; it's the cards the other players think you've got. And that's Russia are playing poker here, where they are saying to the world, "We've got all these cards, and we're in a much better situation." And look, we've got GDP growth, even though that's a real one-track sense of where their economy is, because they're just building stuff to send to the front lines to get blown up. So yeah, a lot of me like rambling on there, Mark. But yeah, I, I don't know how to answer that, because I'm just don't know how much of a plan. I'm going to do some more rambling. I don't know how much of a plan Putin has, because I don't know how much he knows. But also, and I said this, I wrote an article right at the beginning of the war. You failed in your maximalist intentions. Like, you've kind of, scare quotes, kind of lost the war, as in you were expecting to turn over the Ukrainian government within 3 days, spend 2 weeks clearing up with your Rodzgvardia, job done, special military operation, depose the government, get a new one in with Medvedchuk or whoever. Okay, that didn't happen, and within 3 days you realized that wasn't going to happen. So that was your failure, Russia. You failed then. And so then, and I was writing about, okay, what was plan B, C, D, and E? And what you saw is then they were trying to take, militarily, they were trying to take Kiev. Then that failed. And then you like Kiev and, Kharkiv and Sumy kind of area. And like that failed. Okay, so then you're moving down here. Okay, you want everywhere from the Dnipro onwards. Okay, that failed. Then you want the Donbass. Okay, then there's counter-attack offensive, blah, blah, blah. And it got to, okay, so what is your plan now? Like, really? And I'm still at the position now where I don't know what Putin's plan is. Like, I mean, does he really want Odessa? So there was talk the other day again that they want Odessa. And ideally, that makes a lot of sense from a Russian point of view and from a military economic point of view. You want to stop Ukraine exporting, so you take the whole sea, the whole coastal area across past Mykolaiv and Kherson and down to Odessa. So the Ukrainians can't use that to export anything, and you have Odessa as this crown jewel of a place, and the ports and all that. Ideally, that's what Russia want. They're not going to be able to achieve that. So what is their freaking plan here? Are they winging it? I just don't know. I don't know how to answer this question. I'd like to think they've got a plan, but I think they're just trying to last it out as long as possible. See, I think their plans involve turning other countries against Ukraine and making people get bored of the conflict. I think that's their plan, and then just try and get as much as they can. They're willing to throw everything, and the kitchen sink at the Ukrainians. Whether it be North Koreans and Laotians and whoever else. It appears that they want as much as they can get, but I don't know what their actual realistic plan is. Thanks, Mark. F Oink, Delulu Orban Victor Orban is spewing election propaganda again. F Oink should know because he's from Hungary. Thank you, F Oink. I really appreciate that. It is. There's going to be a lot of electioneering going on now because it's all hotting up. In fact, he's been doing that for a couple of months, and a lot of the election campaign sloganeering and posters and whatnot have involved pictures of Zelensky and Ursula von der Leyen, and really kind of slagging off the Ukrainians as part of the actual campaign rhetoric. Stephen Bendal, thank you very much for your ATP Geopolitics membership. Super, super kind. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully you guys are alive and kicking in the live chat. Someone says, AF Kaplan says, Putin's plan is clear. He wants all of Ukraine, and he does not care how much collateral damage or death is required to make it happen. It's not complicated. Yeah, but it is. So, I don't disagree. Ideally, he wants all of Ukraine. But this is where it comes down to how much do you know? Because he should know that is physically impossible. It is just not possible that they are the amount of soldiers they are losing for each square kilometer at the moment is stupendous. And it would take, 89 years to take the rest of Ukraine at that rate or something like that. So that's not going to happen. Now, if he doesn't know that, then he can have that plan. I'm planning on taking the whole of Ukraine. Just doing what you were doing, just over and over? That's a definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. So, if you've got some kind of inkling as to what's going on, you've got to revise that plan back to something that's actually achievable. I can have a plan to fly to the moon on the back of a donkey. Brilliant. What a fun plan that is, but I'm not going to achieve that. And so, what's the point in having that plan if it's completely unachievable? So a plan is smart goals, isn't it? For when you're working in business, is achievable time frame and yada yada yada. So for Trump, what's his plan? Is it achievable? How do you measure it? Is it achievable? What's the time frame, etc., etc., etc.? Anyway, sorry, I better get back to talking about what I was planning on talking about. But thank you very much, guys, for your questions and statements. Absolutely, yeah. I said that's what you wanted, but no, so it's a good plan or a realistic plan. True that. Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry, I wasn't being critical of what you're saying so much. It's just but then that's really interesting. So if that's genuinely his plan, then he is deluded. Can you have a ruler with that much power and that much access to intelligence, as in the intelligence structures, and be so deluded? What does that say? And this goes back to the question at the beginning of the war, which is, how have you invaded a sovereign nation where thinking that with all your intelligence infrastructure, without knowing that they have put up a fight? You genuinely thought they're going to welcome you with open arms and flowers. You gave rations for 5 days. You had plans for just a switch over the government. You were attacking with Rosgvardia with parade uniforms in the back, right? How could you get it that wrong? mean, that was really, really wrong. And I guess there were some key moments that maybe had they gone the other way, things could have looked very different. So Hostomel and the landing at Hostomel that went so badly wrong for the Russians, and other key moments that actually, stop them from achieving those maximalist objectives. Right. Okay. So sorry, I am banging on too much, but there you go. And my partner's back now, so I better wrap things up. Yeah, that's not going to happen quickly. Okay, so we're going to go on to the UK. And sorry if this is quite UK centric. I'm going to talk a bit about general politics and populism and whatnot, but also talk about the meeting of Macron, European security. We are going to talk a little bit about Brexit because it did come up and in quite significant manner. Right, okay, so Starmer and Macron met. Macron had a state visit, met the king, did all the kind of state visit stuff. And, oh, by the way, have I got this to talk about? I don't know if I've got this. I think Donald Trump has not been allowed a state visit. Yeah, here we have it. So I was going to have that right at the end. So Trump has been denied an address to Parliament on his visit to the UK. Remember, Zelensky's had addresses to Parliament, which means the US president will not achieve something enjoyed by predecessors Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. Nobody wants to listen to Trump's BS. Trump denied address to Parliament on a state visit. Wow. So that is a bit uncomfortable. Anyway, Macron was just over there, gave a bunch of addresses, spoke with the king, had a meal with the king. Like it all went really, really well. And it needs to be understood in this context of UK needing to get closer to Europe and the EU for economic reasons. Like we've just had another surprise shrinkage of our economy. There's going to be some of that will be down to tariff wars, trade wars with the United States, and the other variables. But you could also say that the issues with raising national insurance as a form of tax in the UK might have had an impact on businesses and layoffs and whatnot. So anyway, we need to solve the economic situation of having lost out from Brexit. And I know people spit at the screen over this, but all the stats are in. Like we are losing, what is it? Whatever billion pounds a year from being out of the EU now. It is fairly well accepted that it's come at quite an economic cost to the UK, and we need to find that money. So one of the ways of finding that is not to necessarily rejoin the EU, but to just kind of de facto get into bed with the EU in other ways, like security and with the economy. So anyway, they met Macron, kind of sort of representing the EU to some degree, but actually there were a lot of bilateral agreements between France and UK here that affect Europe, but things that only France and UK can talk about, such as nuclear. So we are the only two nuclear powers in Europe, and we have kind of agreed to be the nuclear umbrella for our European partners, which is a step away. It's a kind of like a slap around the face for the US, which is we don't need your nuclear umbrella-ness, or we can do it ourselves, thank you very much. So that was really important. There was also agreements on ceasefire plans and a coalition of the willing, a whole bunch of stuff. And then what was really interesting about this is that when Emmanuel Macron said his speech at the kind of press conference afterwards, Macron went down the list of things and ended with this one in, one out migration pilot scheme. Right, it's like this is what we've achieved, and nuclear stuff, and this and that, and we're going to do this hopefully at the bottom as well. Oh, not at the bottom. That's what he said at the end. Starmer led with that. That's how important immigration is in the UK, with Reform now the most popular party according to polls at the moment. And they are deeply anti-immigration. Still, they're the old UKIP party reformed as Reform. And they are campaigning on immigration. So at the same time, you had this announcement from Starmer and Macron. Starmer led with that and spent a lot of his time talking about that. Nigel Farage was on the channel in a boat with GB News. It's his own pet like news organization, effectively, reporting on boats coming across the channel, right? And that was very, very pertinent. So you've had some people complaining that this has been that this kind of that the news organizations, and this is true, like BBC, Sky News, Channel 4, all the ones were talking about the migrant deal. You will send 50 boat illegal immigrants back, and we'll swap them for 50 people who have got genuine cause for actual asylum claims. And if those people try and get over illegally and we send them back to France, they can never apply for asylum. It will invalidate them. It's supposed to be a way of dealing with the numbers, but to some degree, but also deterring people from trying to cross illegally and make sure that they go through the legal pathway. Lots of people who are anti-Starmer and anti anything other than shooting people in the channel are dead against this, and other people are like, this is a stepping stone towards actually doing like the Conservatives tried to do this with France, but Macron just refused, and that Starmer managed to achieve this was actually pretty good for our relationship with the EU and with France here. Now, Alistair Campbell here says small boats is an issue, but the BBC News coverage of Macron's visit to be entirely focused on that without any mention of the nuclear deal and no reference to his very strong, accurate statements about the role of Brexit has played in creating this mess is a bit weird. But of course, we must find space for a Farage clip from GB News, said the editor again and again and again. So what was really interesting about this, and this is very significant because if you need to understand how populism gets a hold, it gets a hold by controlling the news cycles. So when you have BBC News, who we already know is trying to court reform voters who are anti-BBC, and they understand that these people think the BBC is too woke, and therefore they are, and we know this from actually them kind of admitting that they are trying to change their programming to appeal to reform voters. So that when they report on Macron coming over to UK and they don't talk about a nuclear deal, a freaking nuclear missile deal with France, that we are going to use our nukes to defend Europe by having this nuclear umbrella, that is not kind of barely mentioned at all. And, you know, you've got what Macron said about Brexit, which we'll go on to talk about in a second, etc., etc. None of that was mentioned, and it was all about this migrant deal. And then you have Nigel Farage on TV on the channel, and you are playing GB News on BBC News. Then Farage is popping champagne corks. He's controlling in exactly the same way that Donald Trump controls the news cycles. That's what populists do. And if you play into that, they will get in. And if they get in, they will do their populist thing. So, you know, I'm not a fan of reform, but from a Ukraine point of view, any political party in the UK is generally okay with support for Ukraine, even the Green Party, right? Who have changed their position on NATO, right? So you've got the Conservatives and Labour broadly the same on support for Ukraine. The Lib Dems are very strong in support for Ukraine. The Green Party are actually strong for supporting Ukraine. Reform, they are the people, and the data is out there for the supporters. They are the people, now, not everyone, because I know I have viewers who are reform voters, and they'll be like, I love Ukraine. Okay, yeah. But they are the electorate, they are the demographic reform voters who are more likely to like Putin, more likely to like Trump, and less likely to like Zelensky than any of the other party voters. And so, you know, if we are concerned with supporting Ukraine, then reform getting in is probably bad news. But we come more to kind of talk about populism in a second. So Starmer Macron announced a closer UK-France nuclear weapons coordination, which, as I say, is kind of thumbing the nose up at the US to a significant degree. Declaration made during Macron's visit to the UK brings NATO's two European nuclear powers into closer sync and amid concerns over the United States' future role in European defence. Quote, we cannot imagine a situation of extreme threat to Europe that would not justify a rapid response on our part, whatever the nature of that response may be, Macron said on Thursday evening after meeting with Starmer. Macron said that this is a message to our partners and our adversaries. The French and British also agreed to set up a joint nuclear supervisory group, another step towards strengthening nuclear ties between the countries without the involvement of the US, NATO's dominant power. Now, I found this Euroactive article way down the list. Oh, sorry, I'm not even showing it to you. So let's show you this article. So I found this article way down the list of articles. In fact, I had to put in nuclear. When I put in Starmer Macron agreements, announcements, something like that, I had like 30 articles that talked about the migration thing. and didn't make, like, I had to put in Starmer, Macron, nuclear agreement, and then I come up with a Euroactive piece. And again, not even like many like mainstream media UK pieces, like just the reporting on this I thought is fascinating. I agree with Alistair Campbell. It was completely skewed. So anyway, one of the things achieved is that France and UK are ready to coordinate their nuclear deterrence, and that's Agence France Presse, interestingly. So here we have, and I love this guy. If you get a chance to listen to him, like I played you a whole segment of him, I think 7 minutes of him on BBC News Night. This guy used to be in charge of MI6, so that's a foreign military intelligence. He's called Alex Younger, and he is spot on. Here he was on Newsnight after the Macron and Starmer.
It was a privilege of our generation that we never had to think about this stuff, and the idea of mutual annihilation was a thing of history. And we thought those days were over. But Putin thought differently, and he's prosecuted his war in Ukraine with the implicit implication of the threat of nuclear force. He's intimidated people. He's abused the privilege of possessing nuclear weapons. He's undermined the premise of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that mandates a response. So Europe is sort of slow to move, but it's got Britain and France, both nuclear weapon states, and this is an overdue move. Success will be if enough doubt is planted in Putin's mind that if he attacks Latvia or wherever it is, there will be a nuclear response from France and the UK.
I mean, it feels like a first step towards a European nuclear umbrella. It really does. It's symbolic. This is the first time in 30 years that we have new language about nuclear cooperation between the two countries and a clear European dimension, which was so necessary. I mean, just days before the German election, you have the now German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, who said, we need to have a discussion with France and the UK about their nuclear sharing or potentially nuclear deterrence because they just don't trust the Americans as they used to.
So is that basically telling us that the Americans are in doubt with their umbrella? We have to get the French-British one going.
I think that it makes sense to create as much uncertainty in Putin's mind as possible.
So how will this land in Moscow, this announcement today?
He's screwed up, frankly. So he's precipitated. You know, he started this war on the premise that NATO was irredeemably hostile, intent on moving west, that everyone had it in for Russia. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish.
He's blown it.
Manufactured. He has created those conditions. And now look, we're talking about nuclear cooperation between France and Germany and Europe in a way that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago.
But it's
So what was really interesting that Alex Younger went on, I don't know if I've got a clip of him doing this, but he does have this, is in this clip. So I'm going to play you this clip as well. It's really, really good point.
If Vladimir Putin is never going to get a more friendly US president, why do you think he's overplayed his hand?
Well, no, honestly, I'm mystified. I mean, he is an intelligence officer. I think he's played Trump like a violin so far. He's created this idea that they're mates and that they're equivalent and they can solve all the world's problems together. But it's becoming very clear to Donald Trump that Putin has no other plan other than to subjugate Ukraine. And he's going to make Trump look like a muppet if he continues, and that's not acceptable. So actually, I don't have an answer to your question, but the evidence is he is overplaying his hand.
Yes.
And he doesn't have a military solution. We're 3 years in.
So this is going back to what Mark Biscuit was asking me. You know, does he have a plan? Well, Alex Younger, and he should know, he's a former chap in charge of MI6, says he doesn't have a military solution. In other words, if the plan is to take all of Ukraine, he doesn't have a military solution to that. He doesn't really have a military solution to taking all of, I don't know, all of the land up to the Dnipro. Maybe he doesn't even have a military solution for all of Donbass.
We're 3 years in. He's lost 1 million men, and he's got less territory than he did in 22. Okay, so Trump is his only answer, and I would agree with you. He's playing it very dangerous here.
Well, if Vladimir Putin.
Fascinating. Right. And then we have this from Alex Younger again. So this will be, I think, the last one. And this is where we're going to get to we're going to move off talking about Putin and on to, say, Brexit and immigration, because this is a really significant thing. In fact, I think John Hare has just kind of summed it up for me. He said, I'm 65. In my lifetime, I have never seen so many people scared and pissed off with immigration. It's all anyone ever talks about. So after Macron and Starmer had a chat, my my in-laws came round, and they're staunch kind of Brexiteers, as my own parents are. And I was talking to them, and their kind of the visceral hatred for Starmer was just like, I was like, do you realise that Starmer achieved that? He achieved what the Conservatives couldn't, and blah 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 blah. Trying to put everything in context. And do you know that immigration? I literally just finished my interview with Philip Abaji Jr. and said, Russia is prompting immigration from the Sahel region. They are showing you how to do it and telling you it's a good idea by prompting radio stations to announce this stuff, and they are getting people to go on this journey through Libya up to the Mediterranean and then all the way, in some cases, to the UK. Although it must be known, for those people in the UK that think we have immigration terribly bad, that actually there are more more asylum seekers in France, Italy, and Germany than us. But we in the UK, we think we're the worst place in Europe. They're all trying to go through France and through Germany to get to us. It's like, that's not actually statistically the truth. However, immigration is an issue, and it's certainly perceived as an issue. But I just find it fascinating that someone that's trying to work cooperatively with the country that we need to in order to. Now, Brexit made things worse, right? We divorced ourselves from the EU, which means that we weren't working cooperatively with the EU in order to solve things like immigration issues. So then France would be like, yep, Sodom, send them to the UK, don't give a damn. Rather their problem than our problem. So we then have to go and work closely with France to make sure that doesn't happen and that we've got structures in place. That's what Starmer's done. Starmer and Macron have achieved some great things, they've achieved things which is more than the previous government had done. And in fact, Macron had pushed the UK away, even when the Conservatives were trying to do a very similar scheme. And so it's really funny when I speak to my in-laws and other people, and they're like, "Oh, Starmer's terrible. This is all rubbish. Oh God, it's all horrific." It's like, were you saying that when the Conservatives were trying to do it and they didn't succeed in doing it, and they were trying to do the same thing? No. So, okay, there are some double standards going on here. And it's very difficult, when people get older, it's like they get very much set in their ways. But I just think that what happens is we become so polarized and and you may say that I'm doing that being pro-Labour. I'm not a Labour guy. Like, I have voted Labour, but I voted many parties, and in all these different elections I vote something different. I'm broadly and voting anyone but Tory. Okay, so I sit on the centre left and whatever, but actually, we sit in our echo chambers, but I don't think it's useful to just sit there and go. And you look at Macron and Starmer announcing all these kind of big things and showing cooperation with Europe, and sit there and just slag them off for no reason other than it's Starmer and I hate him. I just think it's a problem. And then we can get on to talking. And I know some people said, please don't ever. Some people said to me, don't ever talk about Brexit. Like it has to be off. It's my channel. I'll talk about what I like, but like it has to be off limits. Why? Because you're finding it uncomfortable now that Brexit's not really delivered what you wanted it to, or it's been shown to be the things that the Remainer camp said it was going to be. I don't know. Is that why people don't like me talking about it? Because it's uncomfortable. Anyway, here we've got the former MI6 guy talking about it because Starmer talked about it. In fact, not Starmer, sorry, Emmanuel Macron talked about it. So I'll probably go to Macron first because, have I got it? Where are you? Oh, no, I don't know that I've got it. So Macron talked about how Brexit was a bit of a problem. I might have to look for that while this is playing. So let's go to Alex Younger.
This is the thing. When I look at Macron and Starmer talking now, it demonstrates the narcissism of the arguments we had around Brexit. 5 years, the extent to which our country turned in on itself. Looks ridiculous with hindsight. This is a serious issue, and we're rising to the occasion. And this is the thing. When I look at Macron and Starmer
so the idea that, when I look at Starmer and Macron talking now, it just demonstrates the narcissism in the arguments we had around Brexit and the extent our country turned in on itself. It looks ridiculous with hindsight. So the idea is that we've got a situation now where there are people starting to realise that hey, it has damaged us in some ways. Now, some people might say it's still worth it. That damage is worth it to get our sovereignty back and the ability to make our own rules. Except, we are still adhering mainly to European laws, because if we're going to export into Europe, then we have to adhere by their kind of rules in order to export into Europe, and so on and so forth. Anyway, this is what Macron said. Oh no, I'm going to share this instead, so you weren't hearing that. Here it is.
We must above all adapt the response to Brexit. It's that we sold a lie to the British people, which is a problem with Europe. But by listing a legal value, the problem has become Brexit. With your
So it's not very clear the translation. Basically, Macron was saying that the UK was sold a lie with Brexit, and that's what Alex Younger was talking to there. And here we have Caroline Lucas, who is, I absolutely love Caroline Lucas. She was a former MP for Brighton, one of the Brighton constituencies. She's was a Green Party leader. She's now not. She retired essentially. But everything Caroline Lucas says when she is on things like Question Time, and interesting, compare the amount of time she was an MP for the Green Party when Reform or UKIP didn't have an MP. And Nigel Farage got on Question Time, like, I don't know, what's his number now? Something like 40 times on Question Time. And she, as a serving MP and representative of the Green Party, got on a fraction of that. And this is what I talk about when there is an amplification of the populists, because they control the news cycles. And yet, you've got the Green Party that have 5 MPs. They've got more MPs than Reform, and they do not get the screen time. They do not get the screen time compared to Reform. And that, I think, is completely unfair.
And hopefully people won't also forget what he's done with Brexit. I mean, he is extraordinary how he just managed to be the Houdini of politics, that he manages to extricate himself from all of these disasters that he's caused in the country, and still comes back with total kind of calmness.
It's interesting, because what Nigel Farage says is, he says what's governing politics now is feelings.
This thing about feeling kind of works two ways, doesn't it? I mean, I'm all for having an emotional appeal to the public, but when feeling is so divorced from any kind of reality, as it was in the Brexit campaign, then I think that gets quite dangerous.
On the substantial issues that this country faces, Reform is talking the language of the average voter like no one else is. Certainly much more than the Green Party, Caroline.
He is exploiting grievances. That's what he does so well. He finds a grievance and he then hones in on it. And that is really what Reform is about. It's about bitterness and anger and pushing against the establishment. And I'm all in favour of saying that the establishment needs to change one hell of a lot. But simply doing that through exploiting grievance, I think, is actually dangerous, because we do need to have some kind of trust in our political system. And I would be the first to say that it needs a massive overhaul to achieve that. But I don't think that's what Reform wants. I think they like just kicking over everything in their sights, if you like, because they like the chaos that comes out of that.
Which, now, this is when you start trying to join the dots here. Populism tries to take away our trust in institutions. Now, this is something I talked about with Elliot Higgins. Go and check out my interview with him. That was a fantastic discussion, talking about the sort of elements, the 3 pillars of democracy. Verification, accountability, debate, and deliberation. Sorry, and part of when you look at countries like the Nordic countries that have the highest happiness ratings, like if you look at the Global Happiness Index, the way they calculate that partly is to do with trust in institutions and trust in the government. And if that is eroded, then you start allowing populism in, and populists will seek to erode trust in institutions. You see that with MAGA republicanism, where the establishment is the enemy. They are the elites, and we need to burn it all to the ground. And, we're going to, social security is all fraud and this and that. And, the money's all wasteful over here. And, there's no trust in the institutions. And if you get to a point where you're just fully distrustful of your institutions, you will allow them to be burnt down to the ground. And then that allows the populists to come in and say, I've got a solution for all this. And it is, and it's going to be like, in the US, it's locking up immigrants. It is 1930s Germany, which is like, we're going to blame hyperinflation on the Jews. And there you had what happened next. And in the US at the moment, I mean, I can show you so many videos of just horrific things going on with regard to ICE. But that's kind of what's going on there, which is, you know, blaming the outsiders, and that's what Reform wants to do. Reform, in my opinion, just wants to be a version of the of MAGA. So yeah. Anyway. Let's press on. So twice President Macron explains the relationship between Brexit and small boat crossings, which began after Brexit. I did have it here.
Need to understand that we must above all adapt the response to Brexit. It's that we sold a lie to the British people, which is a problem with Europe. Need to understand that since Brexit, and I'm saying all this quite honestly, I know it's not your case, Prime Minister, but many people in your country explained that Brexit would make it possible to fight more effectively against illegal immigration. But it's in fact since Brexit that UK has no migratory agreement with the EU. Want there to be.
So there's no migratory agreement with the EU, and actually immigration has got worse since 2016.
An idea that we're not doing our job, we're wasting UK money, reminding when you put £1, we put in €3. And so we're putting in a lot of money to defend the border, which is an exterior border of the EU. We must above all.
So that was Macron there. And yet, you know, so to go back to this issue, that was the only thing that the press was wanting to talk about: immigration, because Farage controls and Reform control the narrative. So are we ready to hear some hard truths about Brexit from the French president? So that's what you heard. That was a lie. That was a recording of him talking live through the Sky News live feed. But when it came to the BBC, like, did you hear about the Brexit part? Did you hear about the nuclear part? No, you heard about the immigration agreement only. You didn't hear that Macron told the British public through that press conference that the British public was sold a lie. Are we ready to hear some hard truths about Brexit from the French president? Just kidding. Let's just cut that out of the 6 o'clock and 9 and 10 o'clock news. But we must make time to show clips of GB News of Nigel Farage pointing at boats on the English Channel.
President Macron of France also maintained that Brexit was a key factor behind the immigration challenges.
It's since Brexit that the UK no longer has any migratory agreement with the EU. So for people wanting to cross, there is no legal admission way, nor a way of sending people back after a crossing. And this creates, and this is a pull factor to attempt the crossing, exactly the inverse effect of what Brexit promised.
But cuts out all the bit about, you know, the Brexit, about the UK population being sold a lie, etc., etc. So, you know, there is a trying to appeal to the Reform voter, but also that issue of immigration is like the biggest thing, to the point where it is even got to Northern Ireland, where they've had the thing in Ballymena where they were, you know, worried about immigrants who were there. But like the boat people, they're not an issue in Northern Ireland. Yet this is what they burnt the other night. Like veterans before refugees stopped the boats, and a life-size bunch of people on a small boat being burnt, an effigy being burnt of it. And you're like, is that where we're at? Where like boat people are not a problem in Northern Ireland. You know, that's a south coast of the UK issue. And yet now you're burning massive effigies. Like that is how much the narrative is controlled. So yeah, I'm slightly worried about that. I'm not saying immigration isn't a problem. Please don't get me wrong here, but it's just how you deal with it. And do you deal with it in a humane and compassionate way? With doing agreements with our neighbours to try and stop that. You know, Starmer went across and did deals with Germany to try and curb like gangs from doing what they're doing, etc., etc. That would be, you know, at least that kind of approach has to take place. Now, at the same time, like Reform are gaining in UK popularity, whereby in the latest May local council elections, they absolutely stormed it in England in certain areas where they were running. And they actually took control of 3 councils. I've talked about this before: Kent County Council, County Durham, and Nottinghamshire. And in each of the cases, they've cocked up, because I've told you before that if you are voting in people whose sole interest is immigration and they have no knowledge or interest about anything else to do with governance, then you are you are electing in unserious people that are not willing to actually be prepared to govern for everyone about everything. And so what's happened is a load of reform people were voted into these three councils. And then a whole bunch of them have had to resign because they're either not fit for purpose, or there are conflicts of interest, or they shouldn't have been able to run anyway. And so you've had a slew of people resigning, and then that forcing by-elections, which is even more costly. And then you've had a load of reform councillors not turning up to meetings, it being total chaos. Kent County Council is basically at times is ground to a halt in terms of what's going on. So John O'Connell says, a reminder that the last time the Farage party ran a council, it was UKIP. So when UKIP ran a council, it was also in Kent. And you'd hope that the Kent electors, Kent voters have learned. It collapsed 9 months after UKIP took control amidst a tidal wave of debts, mismanagement, fraud and corruption. Several senior figures were lucky to escape without criminal judges. So reform in Kent is already collapsing in a torrent of lies, counter lies and backstabbing. How very reform, mirroring the chaos and childish I said, he said in the National Party. So the National Party's also got issues because Rupert Lowe. So now, just in case you don't know, now in the UK, there's been a splinter from reform as Rupert Lowe was kicked out reform and he was one of the 5 MPs. So that put it down to 4 MPs, and another one got voted in the by-election that put it up to 5. Then another one's been kicked out because of allegations of, was it domestic abuse? So now they're back down to 4. So they've lost 2 MPs. 1 MP's gone to start. So now we've got 2 other parties being started, Advance UK and another one being started by Ben Habib, which is a former reform guy, and one by Rupert Lowe, who's just been kicked out as an MP. So there's already chaos at the National Party level. That's what John O'Connell's referring to here. And again, it's this kind of idea that you're not serious. And here's just another example of how unserious they are. So this is John O'Connell again. This was a guy, a former boxer, I think, Luke Campbell, who's elected as a mayor, the mayor of, was it Derbyshire? Can't remember. Hull, that was it. Hull and East Yorkshire. The mayor, Luke Campbell, was aiming for £300 million in government grants. That was his first big real test. So he's aiming to get £300 million in grants for his mayoralty. He failed to complete the paperwork properly because he sacked the administration team. He missed the deadline, so he's not going to get through. Like, you know, you elect clowns and you get a circus. So anyway, that's the sort of thing. I'm really big on just like competency in government, and I just don't think you're going to get that, at least not at the moment, with this very young and naive reform party. Now, talking about Brits and opinions on, say, France, Brits apparently prefer closer ties with France over the US. So the British public knows we can't rely on Trump's America, says best for Britain. It's time to build stronger ties with France and the EU. So would you rather the UK had closer relationship with France or the United States? France 40%, United States 28%. That's a pretty big gap there. And then you've got neithers and don't knows. Now, interesting to see the split of this. So who wants to be closer to France? Labour and Lib Dems. Conservatives want to be closer to the United States, and Reform want to be massively closer to the United States. So only 10% of Reform voters want to be closer to France. 60% of Reform voters want to be closer to the United States. They are MAGA 2.0. That's what Reform is. And I think that's showed in an awful lot of statistics, and also things like Nigel Farage wearing MAGA caps in Reform Blue and going and campaigning for Trump and going to his rallies rather than going to his constituency surgeries in Clacton. He'd much rather, and also then putting Doge into Kent County Council and other county councils that they are controlling. So they are just MAGA 2.0. That's how it is. Now, it's interesting the French, you know, they were selling this meeting as quite slickly in terms of this was, I think, the official Macron video. He often puts out stuff like this where it all looked all rather la-di-da and very, very, you know, good PR, wasn't it? And I guess that sadly for Trump and the Americans, that this isn't what will be afforded to Donald Trump, I don't think, or it be, you know, under duress. But anyway, so it seems that entente amicale seems to have, as Emmanuel Macron here says on his own Twitter feed, a long live l'entente amicale. So I think it went down well for the French. Now, France is an interesting place with regard to Ukraine because you've got the far right there, for Rassemblement National, being rather pro-Russian and being involved with funding from Russia in its past. And you have the left as well, the far left as well, not being particularly pro-Ukraine. So a member of the French Third Worldist left populist, LFI, says Other Europe, is openly wondering who Germany is supposed to rearm against, who its enemies are. A few days ago, another LFI MP, Delogu, was asking on Algerian TV, what do we, the French, have to do with Poland? Do I have to buy Polish apples now? I don't even know if they have apples. Don't forget, as long as paternalism and arrogance is turned against the other Europeans and meant to divide us, many on the far left suddenly have very few problems with it. The idea of Europe has many enemies on the right, on the left, in the global south, in China, in Russia, or in the United States. They all seek to divide us because all of them, for all of them, a united Europe is very inconvenient. That's a really good point. So Russia doesn't want Europe or the EU, and a united EU because it stands up to Russia and is probably a bigger thorn in the side of Russia than the US due to its geographical proximity. Trump's administration and that kind of Heritage Foundation Project 2025 lot, and actually they've had conferences looking into this, want to undermine the EU because they see the EU as a competitor, not an ally, and hence, big 30% tariffs slapped onto the EU today. China would like to undermine the EU. So the EU, everyone loves to hate the EU around the world because they stand in unity for X, Y, and Z. Then within the EU, you've got the far right mainly being Eurosceptic, but also you have issues from the far left as well. And here in France, the LFI, who are not particularly supportive, I think, of Ukraine as well, showing their colours there. Now, Etienne Marcuse here says, important news for Europe and Ukraine. The production of Scalp, Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles will restart this year, 15 years after the last order was placed by NBDA. The number of new missiles ordered remains unknown for now. So I threw this in there as just another example of the sorts of things that are happening at the moment with regard to defence interaction between the UK and France, and that's getting over that EU border to getting us closer. And one of the ways we get closer to France is through defence cooperation. The analyst says the UK and France agree on nuclear weapons cooperation. It's been something the UK has been willing to do for far longer. The French less so because their nuclear deterrent posture has been fiercely independent and it's entirely homegrown. France developed its own weapons, its own strategic and missiles, including at one time land-based IRBMs on the plateau d'Albion. It now operates, as the UK does, a CASD, continuous deterrent at sea. So actually, we are now going to get air-launched nuclear deterrents through the F-35, with at least one SSBN always on patrol, so that's a nuclear submarine. France also has an air launch system which is due to be upgraded to have twice the range. France also agreed to station its nuclear-capable aircraft in Germany to improve their range and add to the deterrence effect. The UK and France will work together on targeting strategies, defence of their bases and submarines, sharing sensitive information on patrols. Bizarre as it may seem, has been an occurrence where one has dinged another and not known it was there beforehand. An overall reaction to a potential threat to a NATO member. This is all essential part of ensuring NATO has a coordinated nuclear strategy outside of the US. Working together for a better is far better than working alone. Yes, yes, yes. And this is my opinion. Like all of this, talk about populism and breaking up the EU and how the UK needs to get closer to Europe is because working together with our allies is better than working alone. We really need to do that, whether we become a member of the EU or not. I see this as a positive development for both nations and NATO. The question is, will it survive the post-Macron era? So if Macron is replaced by Marine Le Pen, or possibly not because of her altercation with the law, but maybe with Bardella, if Rassemblement National get in after Macron, and if Reform and Nigel Farage get in after Starmer, which is at the moment very likely, then where does this put us all in Europe? Where does European unity go? Are we just looking at an individualistic future for nations, where we all go back to working on our own, and then who does that benefit? It will benefit Russia. It will benefit China, and it'll actually benefit to a large degree the United States. because they won't be able to. The United States will be able to have way more leverage over individual nations than the EU as a trading bloc. So, and that's kind of what Trump wants. So it's really important, I think, that the EU sustains, you know, whether you are a Brexiteer or not, you should look at the EU and go, it's a good thing that the EU exists. Like, there were some Brexiteers that after Brexit wanted Nexit. They wanted Netherlands to get out and Greece to get out. They just wanted the whole thing to fall apart. That's really naive, and it's geopolitically stupid. Like, we should want the EU to thrive as a democratic beacon in a world where democracy is at least very challenged at the moment. So Macron leaves office in May 2027. There's no viable candidate from any party currently in the running, with Marine Le Pen barred following her corruption trial verdict. You would hope that some kind of pragmatic approach would be reached, but the risk, too, of a xenophobic fascist party under Farage in 2028 to 2029 could just easily be problematic should we be blighted with it in the UK. There is Gabriel Attal, who was a previous prime minister. He could be in the running as a centrist president there as well. Okay. Now, just one thing, you know, in case there are any strong patriots, UK patriots out there that are watching that haven't turned off because I've been, I don't know, slagging off Farage. We are interesting in the UK where we kind of slag off the EU because it doesn't allow us to have our own national identity and our own sovereignty, whereas you will not find the French doing this. So you look at our big national assets, and we have effectively, in the name of free market capitalism, assets stripped to the UK over the last decades. So British Steel is owned by the Chinese. Royal Mail is owned by the Czechs. British Airways is owned by the Spanish. Yorkshire Water is owned by Singapore. British Telecom is owned by the Indians. Rolls-Royce is owned by Germany, by BMW. Jaguar is owned by the Indians, and many, many others. You know, UK national assets sold to foreign owners, part of the reason we are in this mess. You know, we complain about the French or the Europeans, but they do a much better job of looking after their own national interests, I think, whilst being part of the EU than we have ever done. We're just like, yeah, we want our own sovereignty. Oh, you want to buy anything of ours? Yeah, take it all. Yeah, privatize and sell it all off. So go and take it, run with it. Nice one. Anyway, that's my just last minute whinge. Right, I've been banging on half of you have left because I've been talking about Brexit, no doubt. Anyway, you guys have anything to say? I'm sure you do. Probably a lot of you slagging off my position in the comments. I don't know. I just, all I want, I guess, I have this kind of twee notion of politics and the world, which is that we do live in a globalist society, and we should be talking about working together more than working apart. And the future for humanity lies in cooperation. The solutions to global problems are found in global solutions. And I just think, you know, climate change, for example, how much chance have we got solving climate change each on our own? No, because then we'll be thinking, oh, well, they're not doing it, so we're not going to do it. So we just want competitive advantage in the economic sphere here, there, whatever. No, we need to work together to achieve solutions to something like that. And, you know, as Michael Vuchar says, you know, you need to talk about the mosaic in the UK rather than talk about, I don't know, muesli. Porridge, rather than talk about porridge, which is kind of like everyone thrown in together and then put into one pot, and then you become some homogenous mass. You still need your individuality and your cultural independence and identity within a larger picture, and that's the idea of a mosaic. So a mosaic, you know, you've got your different colors in the picture, and as you stand back, it all becomes like that one single picture. But actually, when you zoom in, there's lots of individuality going on. I guess that's the idea there. So a kind of mosaic understanding. But you're always going to have issues with social cohesion when you have large numbers of people move into new areas. It's just how it happens. So how do you deal with that? How do we deal with immigration in a robust way that is fair and humane? So it's not that you should therefore, if you know, it's not like either you're massively for immigration and everyone should be an immigrant, or you're like Nazi. Like there are many places in between. Yeah. Anyway, right. So let's see if there are any other questions or anything else that you guys have thrown up. So thank you very much to Kevin Forst, always a great supporter of the channel. Really do appreciate you. Mal says, I voted to leave Europe. I was wrong. The war in Ukraine has shown me that. I think there are a lot of people who voted to come out think that they were wrong and were sold a lie. So this is really interesting, Mal. Thank you for being so candid. I think it came down an awful lot to immigration, and the problem, and Europe is finding out that free movement of people is a problem, but it's more of a problem when, so you have an outer border, right? And when you have wars going on very close by, and when you have funnels of immigrants coming up through Africa, through Libya, as Philippa Budgie said the other day, then these are challenges. When they get in, then the Schengen area means you've got free movement, all those people inside. So once you break that outer shell, it's a bit of a problem. Now in the UK, we have a channel that separates us, and that gives us some kind of, I guess, obstacle, more of a hard border. Yeah, I think it's very difficult outside of immigration to make a really decent Brexit argument, and I did that at the time when I debated this in public. So in Bournemouth, a couple of debates I went to concerning this, and pretty much everything I said has come true, and I was on point, so I feel validated over that. But yeah, immigration, if you're big on immigration, then you can definitely form an argument for Brexit. The problem is that our immigration has gone up since we left the EU, and partly because you still need workers to do those jobs that the indigenous population don't want to do. So until you solve that issue, then you're going to need those people to do that work, whether it be doctors or fruit pickers. And so you end up getting a load of people in from India and Pakistan and places where actually a lot of the people who voted Brexit were like, I don't want immigration. And then you're exchanging white European immigration for brown Eastern Asian immigration, and they get even more annoyed over that. And you're like, well, yeah, okay, so these are, but they're such complex problems, and they often don't have answers at all, let alone easy answers. Yeah, so but past that, when you talk about like the geopolitics of being in the EU, I just think that it's much easier to make an argument for staying. But we didn't make a very good argument for staying. There wasn't much narrative for the positives of the European Union, and I think that the war in Ukraine is really interesting for being able to see how the EU works and what it can do, and how it can be a benefit, a geopolitical strategic benefit for all the nations involved, but also for the world. But I still think immigration, obviously immigration is the biggest challenge for the EU, and Russia knows that. And they are going to foment that bad boy for as long as they can. The AfD know that. Rassemblement National know that. Vox know that in Spain. Confederation know that in Poland. So on and so forth. This is far from over, and I do fear that the EU is in a balance, really, and it's going to come down to immigration. Stephen Bandal, I hope Norway will join the EU, and I hope the UK will rejoin soon. Europe must stand together. It's interesting that Norway have started thinking more seriously about joining the EU. There's also been talk about Iceland as well, and also something I haven't talked about is Slovenia and NATO being potentially on the chopping blocks. I'll have to leave that to another video, but it's interesting. I don't think it's the only nation as well that there are starting to be rumblings of referendums on NATO membership, because they won't. I think Spain as well is having an issue too. That was it. Spain and Slovenia. Spain because they didn't want to spend 5%, but actually Slovenia too. So not wanting to commit to these huge expenditures, as on defense as a percentage of GDP, as Trump has wanted, and actually Secretary General of NATO probably wanted as well, right? But it's difficult for some countries. Some countries saying, like, okay, we don't want to do that. Do we need to be in NATO at a time when actually NATO appears to be more important than ever? And yet it might end up being one of these divisive issues where it divides along party lines. And in fact, when they have done the referendum in Spain on NATO membership, it has fallen exactly along party lines. You can see it kind of goes like that. So interestingly, the more right-wing the party, the more support for NATO, and Podemos in Spain, really very little support for NATO. And it kind of goes like that as you go through the political spectrum. So that's something to watch out for. I'll probably have to do a bit more prep on that to speak to you about that. Yeah, and this is another thing. So Spain is buying into Huawei for their electronics for wiretaps. So a Chinese company is going to be running their wiretapping, and people are like, is that what you want to do? So there's loads of controversy about that decision, considering, the US and indeed the UK, that's been a real hot potato. Chinese electronics giants and tech giants being in charge of or having contracts in certain contexts. So yeah, there you go. Anyway, that's enough for me. I better go and spend time with my missus, otherwise she will scalp me. No, there's not much to scalp, is there? She'll have my guts for garters, shall we say. So thank you. Hopefully this was interesting enough for you. I mean, there's a few of you here, so thank you. I know it's quite Brexit heavy at the end. It's really important that we talk about the relationship of the UK to Europe, but also the future of the EU as well. And if we don't talk about immigration, then we're missing something. But the flip side of that is if we speak too much about immigration, then that hijacks the narrative, and it becomes a much bigger issue than it really actually is. So I talked the other day about how our perception, our realities are very, very different, and our view of how many immigrants there are and how many benefit fraudsters there are is massively different from the reality of how many immigrants there actually are and how many people really are committing fraud in our benefit system. But if we allow, as the BBC is allowing to happen, sadly, as I'm a big advocate of the BBC, but if our mainstream media outlets are allowing populists to control the narrative, then that just a little reminder, that is exactly what Putin would want. It's exactly what Putin would want. We need to be careful. We need to support our governments when they are trying to make difficult decisions and trying to do the right thing in these kinds of contexts, and obviously call them out when they do absolute shockers. But I think trying to do deals with France bilaterally is what we have to do if we're going to even remotely if we're going to remotely succeed in controlling immigration from a UK point of view. But yeah, just think long and hard in your daily lives about how narratives are communicated, and Ukraine's a good example. What are you hearing, and why are you hearing what you're hearing, and who is pushing these narratives? And when you're watching your local or your national TV channel, think about the representation on those channels of different political parties, and how often when you're watching Fox News do you get the other side of the story. Fox News is a really good example, where they have the only liberal you ever get on there is Jessica Tarlov, and she's on a program called The Five, and The Five are 4 conservatives against 1 liberal. And then so there, I mean, well done for having liberal on, but it's 4-1, and so she's having to fight that fight every single freaking day to get the other side of the picture out. And so, and you can say the same, I'm sure, about the other side. The difference between media, say, in the US, where it's not regulated in a way like it is in the UK. In the UK, when the BBC, with its charter, also regulation, has to have fairness, but actually it's still platforms reform way more than it ought to, like statistically ought to. So just think about that when you're watching TV and when you're watching the news. Think about, who have they shown here? Is there a skew? What are the biases? Who pays for this TV channel? How's this TV channel funded? And so on and so forth. I know many people now get their news from outside of mainstream media, from places like myself. And I hope that I am skewed, I'm biased, and I will tell you I'm biased. Right, so I am pro, like, centre left, right? But although I'm economically fairly centrist, actually. I'm economically pretty centrist. But on like social matters, I'm further to the left, right? But hopefully I'm not like spinning you a lie or anything, or a narrative that is too broken. But we all interpret things through our own lenses, don't we? Anyway, that's enough for me. Take care, guys. I really do appreciate you. Thank you very much to the people who have supported the channel. Thank you for those people like Michael Duval. Sorry, I mispronounced your name. Thank you, Duval. Michelle? Totally agree with you not letting extreme right define a narrative. With an aging population, you need all the help you can get from migration in healthcare, for instance. Oh my goodness, don't get me started on this. So the other problem, okay, I'm trying to go. It's my famous long goodbyes. The other problem, not the other problem, it's actually connected. One of the underlying problems is our demographic shift. I've talked to you about this turning into that, which is what's happening in I wouldn't say even the Western world, it's China as well. So you had very few people at the top. It used to be this triangle being supported by larger proportions of people, larger amounts of people below. So the middle of the triangle is your working population, and they are sustaining a much smaller population, aging population at the top. So you retire, and these people can afford through tax income to sustain these people not working. Right, and then getting ill and being drains on the welfare system through healthcare and whatnot. So these guys cost a lot. These guys sustain that, and then you have even more children coming up to replace these people. But then what's happened is we've had fewer children. So as our economies or as our societies mature and we have decent welfare and education, we have fewer and fewer children and greater impact on child mortality and mortality in general. We need fewer children, so you have fewer children, and which means you get fewer people in the middle. And as our science has improved and our healthcare has improved, you get more people surviving at the top. So it goes from that to that. And then when you get to something that looks a little bit like that, these people at the top are now the same number of people as the people that are paying for them, and the people that are paying for them can't afford to pay for all these people, and so you start getting an economic black hole. And how do we deal with that? So not only do we have all the issues that we have around the world with war and climate change, we've got a demographic time bomb waiting to go off. And then so then you're like, well it's also that has an effect on economic growth and productivity. So how do we solve that if not enough people are being born? So then you import them, and you say, well, we could train up 1,000 nurses in the UK at whatever cost to the government for training up those nurses, or we can go to the Philippines where they've already trained them up, and we steal 1,000 nurses. Thank you for training them up. We don't have to pay for that, and we'll get you over here. You'll have more of a wage over here than you were having over there, and then they want to come over, and so we import loads of people that are cheaper, that allow us to continue to function and to grow. So if your birth rates drop, your immigration rates arguably are going to overcome that. And if you want immigration to go down, you're going to have to solve how the problem of what those people were doing, what those immigrants were doing. So, when Brexit happened and we stopped getting Eastern European, they may have been well over educated for the jobs they're doing, but we had loads of people fruit picking, and some of them were like degree holders coming over to the UK and fruit picking in Lincolnshire. Then suddenly you're like, okay, we don't have all those people, so oh dear, all the fruit's rotting on the vine or whatever. So how these are problems, and unfortunately they are dilemmas. Like, you solve the immigration problem, then you're going to screw your economic problem. So you solve the economic problem, then dilemmas, and it's just really difficult. But anyway, thanks. Thank you very much for that, and thanks for your support. And sorry, I'm still banging on when I said I was trying to go. I would definitely like to speak to Adam Kinzinger. Really, really would. Okay. Take care, everybody. I will speak to you soon. Good thing I had twins. They can keep themselves entertained, as someone said. Right. Mitch. I'm trying to go, Mitch. I'm trying to go. Thanks for highlighting the Russian divide and conquer efforts. The reason folks employ this strategy is because it works. 100%. We all need to keep an eye on the motives of those advocating these divisive political stances. 110,000 million percent. Divide and conquer, and it's so easy. Like I've said before, Mitch, you've heard me say this countless times, no doubt. If Putin had decided to spend all the money that he spent on the war on divide and conquer tactics through disinformation and influence projects, he could have pulled the EU down already by now. I'm pretty sure. Like, what a waste of money Ukraine was. It's actually united Europe more than people might have thought. And honestly, divide and conquer, the return on investment that Russia are getting from the Internet Research Agency and disinformation campaigns is just absolutely phenomenal. Please don't do this. Please don't do this, Doug Fisher. Let's all bid higher to keep JP here. No, please don't. Right. Thanks, everybody. You take care. I am going to go now. Toodle pips. I really appreciate your support, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. My partner's going to string me up. Take care.